Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the Mass Teachers Retirement System, our executive director, and our board, I'd like to thank you for joining us. This is going to be the first of several sessions we're doing this summer. We'll get into that in just a moment, but we're looking very much looking forward to going through lots of different topics for employers this summer, and we're going to get started today. So my name is Robert George. I'm the Director of Employer Info Systems at the MTRS. And we're hoping this presentation will take roughly an hour. For anyone who is joining via the internet, these will be saved for folks. If you know somebody who could not join us today, these will be saved and available on our site externally. And so we'll make mention of, there'll be a couple references today just in case someone's watching it after the fact. So this morning, you might be looking at this agenda and think it's no way we're going to be finished in an hour, especially if you know me. But I promise we'll try to wrap it up in that time frame. Today we're going to talk about some basics about the MTRS, what trainings we're offering, and a bunch of different sort of higher level topics for employers. You'll note that we're doing a whole series of training sessions. I'll get into exactly what we're going to be offering in the next slide. However, in this session, we're going to talk about some of the basics about the MTRS, and we're also going to talk about different aspects of the expectations for an employer and how the MTRS works and how that relationship works. And so we'll be covering a lot of smaller topics, working our way into the bigger topics in additional sessions. So here today, we have a list of all the different training sessions we're doing. So really, this is overall 6 sessions. What you'll notice is that the second and third on this list are the same topics, but we're going to do 2 different sessions. So we're going to start today with introducing everyone to the MTRS. The next session is really going to be about membership eligibility and onboarding, and we're splitting that into 2 sessions. One for the most of the school districts and most of the employers, municipalities, and everybody else. And then we're going to do a charter school edition because there are some very specific rules to charter schools when it comes to membership eligibility. So we're going to hone in on those in the charter school version of that program. We're also going to be offering a program on creditable service, employment events, and basically just how service works. And the importance of that will make sense after we go through today's session. Regular compensation, which is what pay is retirement eligible, we're going to do an entire session just on that. We're going to try and bulk that up a little bit and see if we can do a good job of making sure everybody is fully aware of the complexity of regular compensation. It always sounds easy to say what's eligible, but it can be quite complex, and it's hard to nail down because everybody has different specific rules and other facts that can change determinations. And then last but certainly not least, we'll go through deduction reporting. So the deduction reporting is going to be broken into 2 pieces. There's going to be a section on importing files, and there's going to be a section on correcting the files once they've been imported. And we broke that into 2 segments, not only for length, but in a lot of school districts, there are folks that do either or. And so what we wanted to do is create a session for each. And that way, for districts who do segment that process, they can send only the folks only to the session they need to. And for employers that do both halves of that process, well, if nothing else, you get a break from me in between. So hopefully you'll find that this setup is conducive to helping everybody get up to speed. So here we are on the first training session. So again, if you're joining us via video, you'll notice as you're going through the different sessions, with each session, we'll highlight in blue which session we're on so that folks can make sure that they do them in order. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about the MTRS. So the MTRS was founded and has been providing benefits since 1914. We're a state agency formed under Chapter 32 with a public retirement system for all public school teachers. We're the largest. There are, believe it or not, 104 different contributory retirement systems in Massachusetts, everything from local boards, there's some county boards, and we're the largest of all of them. We're governed by a 7-member unpaid board. We have 2 offices, one currently in Charlestown and another one currently in Springfield. And we operate as a defined benefit plan under IRS Section 401A, which means we're an annuity, but basically we're a pre-tax pension plan. Now, some other things, something that I really can't say enough, and sometimes I think gets overlooked, is that we're a free benefit to public employers. So, for all the different schools that contribute to our plan and belong to our plan, there's no employer match, which saves schools a ton of funds because you don't have to. If you were contributing into Social Security instead of the MTRS, you'd be paying an employer match on everything your employees pay in. The MTRS was allowed to do this because it pre-existed Social Security. So, when Social Security was created, Massachusetts was given the option to opt out of Social Security and allow or continue with their pension plan. Now, sometimes I think employers overlook the fact that this can be used as a recruiting tool. This is a guaranteed benefit. And you're going to hear a little bit more about that, but and it's certainly whether it's really stressed or not, it can be a retention tool. You can help keep experienced educators instead of losing them to the private sector if they have so much time into their pension because they want to earn a better pension. So it can be a very useful tool for retention as well. Now, when folks are working in a public school district, they earn credit for public employment. So you'll always hear people talking about their years of credible service if you're around folks that have been in the system longer. And please keep in mind some of these overall topics, even if you don't belong to the MTRS, in theory, you probably belong to a local retirement board, and most of these fundamental structures are exactly the same for your retirement board, because it would be one of the other 104 retirement boards. So members earn service credit for public employment. For teachers, if they go from one employer to the other, it automatically accumulates in the same MTRS profile. So if somebody worked for 10 years in one school district and then they go to school district B, all that service is there, and they continue earning the same benefit with the accumulated service from multiple schools. Now, non-teacher service, if they have public service in one of the other 104 contributory retirement systems we mentioned, that can transfer to us as well. So if you have somebody, I'd say the most common scenario is probably a teacher's aide or a paraprofessional. And prior to being a teacher, let's say they accumulate 3 years. Now they become a teacher, right? They've gotten their license and they become a classroom teacher. Well, those couple of years of service, as long as the MTRS is made aware of them during enrollment, we're going to transfer that service over. So they might be a first-year teacher, but they're a fourth year when it comes to earning their pension credit, and that's really important. That also might apply to some administrators. So if anybody here is working for a school district now and possibly is MTRS eligible, or even if you're in your local board, but you're in a different local board before, make sure your current pension system knows that, and they'll transfer over your service credit. Another thing that helps with creditable service is that members can enhance their benefit through a limited number of service purchases. We have all of that information online and available for members. They can look in the forum section under the member section of the MTRS website. I mentioned before that service transfers. They do not have to purchase time if it's going to transfer. Generally, they just need to make sure we're aware of the time. So the most common reasons services are transferred is that during enrollment, a member didn't understand to tell us about it. So it's just important that we know that so that we can transfer in the service and make sure we make their account whole. And so this accumulation of service, this is what it really gets down to. These are the benefits that the MTRS provides. First, MTRS benefits, retirement benefits, are based on 3 factors: age, service, and salary. So at a certain age, with a certain amount of service, a percentage of a person's salary average turns into the retirement benefit. It depends how many years of service they have at the time of retirement and exactly what age they were at the time they retire. Unlike when you were young and you were 4.5, you can't. There's no partial credit for age. You are the age you are when you retire. You'll very commonly see that we suggest to teachers who have summer birth dates, if they're going to retire June 30th, but let's say their birthday was July 17th, happy belated if that's you. So that person would be better off in many cases retiring on July 17th because they're a year older. So we try to reach out to all teachers who apply for a June 30th retirement if we notice they have summer birthdays, and just ask if they'd like to slide that back a little. They won't get paid for the time in between June 30th or July 1st, technically, and their birthday, but it might be better off for them because they're technically a year older. And so, depending on their calculation, sometimes it's a good idea. Now, as I mentioned before, for folks who do apply for retirement, that's guaranteed for life. So they will earn their benefit, whether they, we have a teacher who, our executive director did a great series that's available on our website, where she interviewed somebody who was 100 years old, and she had been collecting benefit for 40 years. Hopefully we all get to that point. We all hope we do. But her benefit was guaranteed for life. It didn't matter how long she was retired. So that's also a very good selling point to the pension system, as opposed to, say, some other investment vehicles. Now, with the benefit calculations, there are two tiers. The first tier is the traditional program, and that was the one available from 1914 through 2012. In 2012, Tier 2 was introduced as part of pension reform. And so anyone who joined the system for the first time after 2012 is going to be subject to that Tier 2 status. Their tier status is in MTRS. Members can view it if they log in and check out their account. And anyone who transfers in service, I know I keep mentioning the transfers in, but when you transfer in service, you also transfer your retirement rights. And so if somebody transfers in service, but it predates them and makes them a Tier 1 member, as long as we're aware of that, we'll make that happen. And of course, even if we don't know about it for the first, 20 years of MTRS membership, if we ever become aware of the fact that they were a Tier 1 member, they become that Tier 1 member immediately upon our receiving that transfer. And it's retroactive, of course. Now, members can not only opt into a benefit that will pay them for the rest of their life, but there is an option. There are 3 different options. There's a lot more information on this on the member version of the website, but just to give employers a general idea, there are 3 different options at retirement, and they're referred to as A, B, and C. So option A is the maximum benefit, and that maximum benefit's based on the fact that the person retiring is not leaving a beneficiary benefit. The second option is where there would be a cash balance. So after a certain amount of pension has been paid, if there's still cash in the account, they can pay that out to their family for probably the least taken version of the benefit, really. And then option C is a benefit where a member can list a first family member, and then that person's covered. So if the retiree were to pass away before their spouse is covered for the rest of their life. This is a very common option. Folks, particularly if they're married, will leave a benefit to their spouse, and that way they can have the peace of mind of knowing not only have they earned a benefit, but they can leave a benefit for their spouse if they predecease their spouse. Now, for members who, this generally will be more logical for folks who have short periods of service, but members who, let's say they're never going to earn a retirement benefit. They've only been a teacher in Massachusetts for a couple of years, and they're going to, move to Hawaii, because who doesn't want to live in Hawaii, right? So those folks can take a refund of their account. And anyone with less than 10 years of service will not only get their account in interest, but the MTRS will scale up their interest to 4% retroactively to the beginning of when they joined membership. So, and then last but not least, the MTRS also offers benefits under accidental or ordinary disability. So accidental being they're working and there's some sort of accident that happens at work. And then ordinary disability would be outside of work. Let's say the person becomes ill, they're in some sort of an accident or something. That would be the type of disability where they can't continue to work, but it wasn't work related. There are 2 different calculations processes for those, and there's forms to fill out. Fortunately, from a ratio perspective, we don't have nearly as many disability folks as we do regular retirements. So if you run into that, please let us know, and we can have somebody from our benefits team help with the employer portion of that. Members can certainly find all the information online as well as downloading the applications. So, okay, so that's sort of just an overview of what the MTRS is and what benefits we provide. I wasn't sure if there are any questions. Okay, so looks like we don't have any questions. So that's great. Hopefully it doesn't mean everybody's fallen asleep yet. It is retirement, so hopefully you've caffeinated. All right, we're going to go on to the next step. And so we talked about the benefit that we offer. Again, it's free to employers, right? But what we are going to need, even though you're not making contributions, your contribution's really going to be being our partner in this process. So we're providing a benefit to your employees, and you don't have to pay a dime. However, we are going to need a lot of stuff, right? And we need to know when they're hired. We're going to need if they're even eligible for us. So we're going to talk a little bit about your role in the process. So first, we need you to determine who's eligible. We're going to have sessions on that, of course, to help you with that process. But really, when we're not there when you're hiring every person. If we were, it'd be creepy. So when you're onboarding, it's going to be a very important step in the process, whether you're onboarding a brand new employee or if there's just some sort of a qualified change that's happening in their employment. You have somebody who's going from a paraprofessional to a classroom teacher in your employment, right? They're going from middle school to maybe even the same middle school, two doors down, they're becoming the first grade teacher. So on the employer side, you need to be able to determine who's eligible, or at least know when you have to ask questions if they're not, if you know whether or not they're eligible. Making sure you're onboarding your folks on time and making sure they follow up and complete their portion. You have to figure out what pay is going to be retirement eligible. We're going to have a session specifically on that to hopefully help clear that up a little bit. You got to make sure you're taking deductions from eligible pay, remitting all those contributions, of course, and then reporting each month with all the different information. So along with that, so that's sort of the basics, right? I mean, you're bringing your employees, you're adding them to the retirement system, you're figuring out who's eligible, you're figuring out what pay is eligible. We also, during employment's complicated, as everyone knows. So there are going to be other events that can affect people's service and their status with the retirement system. So there's going to be some changes that we need your help with reporting as well. So that's going to be through employment events, if you've, terminated an employee, or if they've terminated themselves, or if they go on leave of absence, if they come back from leave of absence, God forbid they go on workers' compensation. So, there's complexities there. And we're going to need reporting to sort of help make sure that MTRS is reflective of their career, so that we're making sure that they get the benefit that they've earned. And so in addition to that, we might also need some help with a couple of different service purchase applications. We're going to talk about those specifically. Not all of them will involve employers, but a few of them do. We also need to make sure that you can verify service. So we might have records and we're compiling it over a very long time. We always check with employers to make sure that there isn't something we don't know about, or if our records for some reason don't match yours, and what discrepancies might need to get ironed out. And then last but not least, we need you to complete refund and retirement applications. So when somebody's applying for a benefit, again, we're looking to you to help us certify their information and make sure what we have is accurate and the people are earning the benefit that they deserve. They've earned it. We want to make sure we're paying it. So with that, we're going to go through a lot of these steps. I don't know if we have any questions at this point. I don't think.
One just came in. What happens when one FTE special education teacher becomes a 0.5 FTE special education and 0.5 FTE BCBA?
Oh, okay. So the question is, what if somebody is a 1.0 and they're a SPED teacher, and now they're going to split? Are they going to just a 0.5 BCBA, or are they going to a half and a half? Or is it not clear?
It looks like a half and a half.
Okay. So a half and a half is interesting. Generally speaking, it's going to, so we're going to talk about eligibility. I'm going to very briefly touch on this, but this is more so a question for the eligibility session that we're going to be hosting. So on a very quick level, the BCBA position tends to not be eligible because employers tend to not require a DESE license for it, because there's a different kind of licensure for it. And so if the person is half and half, technically the half for BCBA should probably be enrolled in the local retirement board for something called dual membership, which is provided for in the statute. And then the other half would remain with the MTRS. But what I'd like to do is give a much more specific answer to that when we're doing the session on eligibility. So if you could please attend that, and if we don't answer that question in that session, please bring it up, and we'll try to do our best to answer it the best we can, and hopefully that helps. All right, so next, I want to talk about MTRS a little bit. We're not going to get too deep into MTRS in this particular session, but we have a picture of our actual external website, and on the left-hand side, you'll see a MTRS login. Many of you have already been to the MTRS program, and this screen here will look pretty familiar to you. Put in your username and password. We have two-factor authentication, and that will bring you to a home page similar to this. Now, we're not going to go through the MTRS program very specifically. I just wanted to kind of introduce it a little bit for folks. We're going to talk about it deeper in different sessions based on the tasks related to it in those other sessions. However, I did want to bring up in this session that you have, not only do we have MTRS Access here, but you'll see that when you get into the main screen on the far left is the links to all the different functions that you perform. We have a shortcut menu in the middle where it will bring you to a function and start up a function at the same time. So under the employee roster, if you clicked into that, you can also register brand new employees. So we kind of have this quick links in the middle that allows you to bring up the roster and start a registration by clicking on it once. It probably saves you about 2.5 seconds, but that's what that middle section of links is all about. And then on the far right, you'll see a news feed. So in the news feed, now generally we'll send you an email blast if there's something really big going on, but a couple of things that are important about the news feed. So one of the things is that we will warn you, MTRS comes down for a couple of days every month, and that's so that we can prepare and run our retiree payroll. Our retiree payroll has over 70,000 records on it. So for those of you who run payroll, I'm sure you can imagine it's a bit of a to-do. It also gives us an opportunity to check input from sources like employers so that hopefully if we can spot something that might be problematic, we can take care of it before it becomes a bigger problem. And so that's the goal with that. So each month, we're going to take it down for a little while, and we're going to warn you ahead of time by putting the information in the news section. So we'll tell you, for instance, this last week is when we had taken it down. So there was warning up, and we try to get the warning for the upcoming month online by the 1st of each month. So, and that's our goal. And for those of you who process retiree insurance, it's probably a little more even of a focus for you because that's your deadline to get everything in for the retiree payroll. So just wanted to kind of briefly touch on that. Again, we'll talk about more MTRS functions when we're doing them in the particular sessions later in the training program. But here I want to talk about MTRS security. And so I didn't want to talk about MTRS security without at least showing you MTRS. So MTRS is our portal, and it is our pension management system. And so with that, of course, we're going to give employers access to this program so you guys can process things right in the system. We need to make sure we're keeping it secure for all our members, right? So employers are granted access to MTRS through a portal. We call it ESS, Employer Self-Service. Now, superintendents and executive directors for active employers, folks who are currently employing folks, they are required to designate a security officer. We call them a security administrator. And that person is in charge of who should or should not have access from the administrator point of view. Everybody who's a member gets access as a member. You guys don't have to manage that. What you're telling us is, okay, I'm the Aviary Public Schools. This is our business manager. We want our business manager to have access. We need our town treasurer to have access. So that person's the coordinator. They are the gatekeeper to who should or should not have access in the school, and they get designated by the superintendent. Now, we do have a few towns that still access MTRS even after they're active. So let's say they've been incorporated into a fully regional school system. Well, before they were fully regionalized, they may have had some retirees that they need access to MTRS for retiree insurance purposes. So in those cases, the town treasurer is the default security administrator. So there are, I think, only 15 towns at this point who are fully regionalized into a regional situation where they still need access. So in those 15 towns, the town treasurer is the default security administrator. And they generally have far less need for MTRS because they don't have active employees contributing to the system. Well, they do, but they're paying the regional for them. So, the regional is taking care of all of that. Now, it's the responsibility of the employer. So if you have somebody who's joining and hey, we need to get this person access, and we know that this process isn't perfect, we're trying to do our best, but really that person needs to go through their security administrator and ask the security administrator for access, and then we can grant it. So if they ask us directly, which is always welcome, we'll also reach out to the security administrator because before we can set them up, we need that person's permission. So you'll see commonly if you have somebody brand new and they're like, hey, we just hired Mary, and Mary's going to join us, and Mary needs access. So if Jen is her security administrator, we're going to reach out to Jen and say, hey, Jen, is it okay if we give Mary access? So that's a pretty standard process. Please know that we reserve the right to suspend anyone's access if we have any suspicion of anything, really. So if we think there's something going on, maybe we've heard the person has left the employment or something like that. This could occasionally mean we accidentally suspend somebody who, we misunderstood when they were leaving or something like that. And certainly we can restore it if needed. But whenever there's a doubt, we're going to suspend the access. But it's up to the employer to make sure they tell us when people leave. So if if someone's going to be leaving employment employment at your school district who has MTRS administrator access, just make sure we're aware, and we'll block them off, and that way the system is secure. Now, in addition to this process, and please keep in mind, if folks have a problem with their password, we use two-factor authentication, and they can also unlock themselves using that same two-factor authentication. So that's not a headache that the school has to take on. And here, along with that security process, I just wanted to include a quick screenshot of what a security administrator designation form looks like. So this is a form that the superintendent would fill out. Generally, we'll send it to the superintendent. So this one's addressed to Barbara Blackbird from Aviary Public Schools. And, we'll request that Barbara, in this particular case, designates a security officer so they can take care of MTRS. And that's kind of how that process works. Relatively simple. So it just gets emailed back, we set people up, and then hopefully they're good to go. All right. Any questions? No? Cool. All right. So from that, we're going to go into some of the other topics now. So the first one, this is one we get questions on every once in a while, which is federal grant funded MTRS members. So we talked about the retirement system. We talked about how the retirement system is free to employers, right? The Commonwealth's paying the liability on it. And so federal grants become something that's sort of an interesting side piece to this. So again, the MTRS is funded by the Commonwealth and school and teacher contributions, of course. And so to offset the additional burden, there was a burden sort of put on the retirement system by the fact that federal funds create so many jobs, right? This isn't a bad thing. It's just it creates an extra burden or an extra payment that the Commonwealth has to make because of it. So if you have a federal grant and there is a portion of that federal grant that's going to require or going to fund teacher salaries, you'll notice that gets broken out in the grant application that you file with DESE, and that there's a 9% pension match that comes out of it. Now, when you're first applying for it, now, again, all of this is handled with DESE. We'll talk about that in just a second. The 9% offset is distinct from the contributions made by the member. So you don't charge the member for this. They don't have to pay it. They don't have anything to do with it. This comes right out of the grant application itself. And sometimes that means you have to allocate a little bit more money from the grant because it's going to fund an MTRS salary. So you want to make sure you're accounting for that. If you're paying somebody $90,000 from a grant, then you're probably going to want to come up with another, $8,100 from the grant funds to help pay for the pension match. Now, when DESE disperses the grant to you, they are going to take out 4/5 of that liability. That way, the Commonwealth sees a lot of the cash up front as the grant is being dispersed, and there's also a settlement process that's going to happen at the end of the year. So I'll talk about that in just 1 minute. But please note that federal grants are managed by DESE; they're not managed by the MTRS. So even though we're kind of involved in this process to a point, our involvement is pretty limited. They're managed by the DESE grant office. All the applications and paperwork are through DESE. And so you'll notice that when you're filling out your grant paperwork and when you're going through your application process, though, that this is one of the line items that they fill out. I don't know if it's still the form they use, but at one point they used a form called an FR1, and it would be one of the things you had to designate on the form. So when DESE is distributing the grant, they're going to take 4/5 of this pension match liability right off of the payment. And then at the end of the year, you as a school, you settle up with DESE. You say, okay, in the beginning of the year, we had all these plans, but as everyone knows, life isn't always going to go according to plan, right? So you get together with DESE. There's some paperwork that you file at the end of the year. And what happens is you figure out, okay, we expected to use this much. We, maybe the allocations within the grant as permitted might be a little different. Maybe you used a little less than you were expecting, or whatever the situation is. So if the amount due hasn't changed, you simply make a payment to the MTRS for 1/5 of the pension match, because 4/5 had already been taken out when the funds were distributed to you. Now, if the amounts change, you may owe more or less. And again, you would fill out that would all be calculated on the DESE paperwork for the grant management. So that part's kind of outside of us, but sometimes you might be due a refund, right? So a couple things to keep in mind. Again, federal grants payments are not to the member. They're not member contributions. They do not go on the member's account. They go to the pension fund. They technically don't even go to the pension fund. They go to the legislature, who then cuts a check to the pension fund later. So If you determine that a refund's due, you filed all your paperwork, you said, okay, we only used half of what we were expecting out of this grant for MTRS salaries compared to what we thought we were. So now we're going to reduce some money back. So if that's the case, you want to make sure you send a letter to the MTRS to the attention of Lucy Zhang, and Lucy will process your refund request. And just like the request, with the request, we'll need a copy of the finalized paperwork with DESI, and just basically a very basic letter saying we need a refund because things changed. When you're sending your initial payments too, something I forgot to highlight a little bit is that your payment itself should not go to the payroll account. It should go to the MTRS's main office. And that's again because the funds aren't going to the pension fund. They're not member contributions. That we're sort of a pass-through agent that gives the money to the legislature. I think they set it up that way because they knew that as a state agency, we'd be talking to schools all the time. So it probably just seemed like the most natural flow at the time. So I don't know, have we received any questions? Okay, perfect. So certainly if folks come up with questions later, you can always reach out to us as well. So the next step, another thing that doesn't happen quite as often is say normal monthly reporting, which is active military service. So members who are called to duty while employed, there's a federal law that requires that they not lose any service credit in their pension. Right. So if they're called to duty, so somebody's working as a math teacher, they're working as an administrator, whatever position they're holding, there are some stringent laws around how that's to be handled. Right. So first, obviously, employers are required to reserve their jobs while they serve, and then employers are required to make contributions to the member. To their retirement account on behalf of the member, right? So these are active military service contributions. Now, you don't make them every month. The way this works is the employee is entitled to this payment if they are both honorably discharged and they return to service within 2 years of completing their service. So if a person is gone, let's say they've been shipped overseas and they're on a tour of duty for 18 months. So the 2-year clock starts once they return or they've been actively honorably discharged. Okay, and the honorable discharge is important because if they're dishonorably discharged, they don't qualify. So if they've been honorably discharged, and they return to employment with the employer, then the employer is required to have made the makeup contributions for their service. So there's going to be a couple components of this too, because I mentioned MTRS before, and we're going to talk about this a little more on the cred service training. But there's an event you want to put in MTRS to say this person's away on active military duty. And then when they return, you say they've returned to contributing, and then you have to fill out a form and send us a check. And hopefully this never happens, but technically if a member were to die in service, to my knowledge, I know of only one case where this has happened, but if the person were to die in service while they're serving active military duty, the school district is required to pay the contributions that would have accumulated in their account through their date of death. And that's per a law that was passed called the HART Act. So again, not some districts have this a little more. If you're situated maybe a little close to a military base, you might have a better chance of having staff that are military. But if you have questions on this, the most important thing really to gather here is that if you do have questions or if you have a situation, you'll be understanding the fact that the employer has to make the payment. It's not a voluntary thing. It's not something the school committee has to vote on. They might have to vote on the fact that a check goes out. That's fine, but it's a required payment. There's no choice. And that if you run into the situation, we don't expect you to memorize the specifics. We have this information available on our website, and you can certainly reach out to the team. Now, when you have a situation, the person comes back, let's say they've been gone for 6 months, they return to service, you fill out a form. I'm going to show you what the form looks like in just one moment. And there's also a military form called DD-214. And the DD-214 is from the Department of Defense, and it basically just states out what the person's military record is. So it'll say how long they were actively serving, and it will include whether or not they were honorably or dishonorably discharged. So that'll be important. And then once you have that information, you submit the military service payment. Do not send it with deduction reports. Again, this is another kind of payment. You want to send it to us directly. This does go in the member's account, but it gets accounted for a little differently. So because you're purchasing the service for them, if a member were to take a refund, you get the money back, not the member. So it gets accounted for a little bit differently on their actual member account. Occasionally, nobody knew to do this, right? So we found out, we just had a case recently for one of our towns in the West, and back in 2005, one of their employees went on active military duty, and the school just didn't realize that they had this responsibility. So we're now letting them know, okay, this is what they would have been paid had they been out. We need to figure this out, and you need to send us a check. So the other thing is, because there's a different law in the system, if they have a leave of absence of less than 30 days, they automatically get credit. You do not have to fill this out every time they go for a short exercise. If they get called to the National Guard for 3 days, you do not have to fill this out, because less than 30 days, they automatically get credit from the pension system. So again, this would be more so they get called to active duty, and they're going to be, they're going to be gone for a little while. And this is the military form. I'm not going to go through the minutia of it, but you can see you just put in member info, what their military data is. And again, please include a copy of the DD-214. You should get a copy of that and have it on records, if nothing else, to prove that you're complying with the law. And then B, it will tell you if you're on the hook for the payment. If the person was not honorably discharged, they're not entitled to this service. So it's important that you get that on behalf of your employer. All right. Now, another situation that hopefully is really rare, and that is legal notification responsibilities. So if you have a teacher who, or any employee that's an MTRS member, who is suspected of wrongdoing, if they're being looked into maybe by the police, if they're seem to have committed a crime in relation to their in relation to their job, it is important that you let the retirement system know. Now, just because somebody is being investigated, it does not mean that they lose their pension right away, but it's important for the MTRS to be aware of the situation, because they could be in a situation where we might have to make an evaluation on whether or not they forfeited their pension. You'll see that there are a couple of requirements very specifically in the law. So if a person is under indictment, if they are convicted, then the law kicks in and you're legally required to tell us. So you're required to tell us if you know they've been indicted, and the district attorney and the attorney general are also required to tell us if they've been convicted of a crime. Forfeiture, or whether or not they're going to be forfeited, it's non-negotiable. Like, this isn't something you can kind of quietly say, look, we won't call the cops, but we need you to go, and we're going to do an employment settlement. If they've committed a crime while in the act of their duties, this is something that's very specifically in the law, and employers do not have the right to sort of bargain that away. And then, of course, if somebody is convicted of a crime and it's connected to their position, and some of these are the worst cases you'll ever hear, they will lose their pension, and they will get a refund of their contributions without any interest, even if they've already applied for and are retired by the time we find out. So that can be also very important. And hopefully something you don't run into. On a much lighter note, so as I mentioned before, one of the benefits we offer is refunds. So if a member, we're going to venture in a little bit some of the applications that we need help with employers completing. So the first is a refund. So you have a member, let's say they commit to teaching, they've decided to move out of state, or maybe they've just kind of said, look, I always thought I wanted to be a teacher, mom and dad were teachers, but it's just really not my thing, right? So once they've terminated service, a member can apply for an account refund. That refund can either be issued directly to them, or they can roll it over to another retirement type. Maybe they're going to do better investing it in the market or something, and they're going to go work for Microsoft, right? So all of that is perfectly fine. So you'll see that there's part 2 of a refund application where we need an employer to confirm, yes, the person was employed, this is when they worked here, and the fact that they've left. Sometimes when folks are thinking about leaving, or they're close to leaving, maybe they resigned, but the school year hasn't ended yet, they cannot apply for a refund until they're actually left service. So that's also an important thing. And in that, they cannot have gone into, I'm going to go to the next slide actually for this. They can only be processed after their final contributions have been received, right? So that can become a little bit of a problem for us. We have to get the contributions. Sometimes they might not be processed, and we have something we'll talk about last to how we kind of get around that a little bit. They also can't be contributing to another retirement board. So they may have left teaching, but if they took a job at the city library, well, as I mentioned before, service transfers, right? So they're no longer, even though they might not be our member, they're required to transfer their account. It's not an optional thing. And so they would not be eligible for a member refund. If they switch departments within the same employer, so they were a school employee, but now they're going to go work for the I don't know, let's say DESE, even it's a state. That person's account is required to transfer DESE, and they're not eligible to take a refund in that situation, which really, in a lot of cases, protects members. The member themselves are responsible for returning the application. So they'll fill out their part, they give you a part to complete, you give it back to them, and then they're required to send the package. That way that we don't get caught up in a he said, she said about who sent it or that sort of thing. They have to collect the entire thing from you and then send it to us. Now we strive to have all refund applications paid out within 60 days of receipt. It's not always a perfect science, depending on the situation. However, that's a goal we have and something required by law. So we're looking to meet that in every opportunity we can. One thing to always point out to members, especially if you have newer members, if they have failed to fill out their enrollment responsibilities, that is one of the few exceptions where that we will violate the 60-day rule because the person never fully set them up as a member. So if you're looking to find an incentive to get people to enroll, remind them that they can't apply for benefits if they're not enrolled. Okay, so if a member takes a refund of their account, as I was mentioning, the service transfers always transfer rights. Well, if a member takes a refund, whether it's rolled to another retirement type, Fidelity or something, or if they take the money in cash, technically a check, that person is terminating their benefits and their rights to the retirement system. So they're going to lose their tier status, they're going to lose their rate status. And if they ever take a public job again and they rejoin, whether it's the MTRS or another retirement system, they start from that day forward. So whatever rate is in place, whatever benefit tier is in place, all those things, they would be starting from afresh. So it's always an important thing for somebody to know before they take their account refund. And then last but not least, we do have some school districts that are still trying to get caught up on the deduction reporting. So occasionally we might be looking for payroll verification of some of the same information that we asked before on part 2 of the refund application. And that's because not all their contributions are in their account yet. So we're trying to avoid this as much as we can. However, we have competing priorities. We have to make sure we get data that's clean into the system. But we also have to make sure we refund people in 60 days. So we might be looking for some information on top of the part 2 from your payroll system to just verify those contributions all should be there. And then we will pay them in good faith so that once all your reports are caught up, that will bring their account back to 0. Are there any questions on refunds, Lauren? No? Okay. Hopefully I'm not going too fast. Okay, so the next thing that we might ask you to fill out is service verification for credible service requests. So sometimes members can download their creditable service from MTRS. However, that is available for members who joined. It will be fully available for members who joined the MTRS from 2010 to present, right? And more that's becoming a bigger population of our members. Now, members before 2010, we haven't lost any of their service, but because it wasn't processed in MTRS, it might not be immediately available for viewing. And so what we have to do on the back end is we have to have someone on our side evaluate their service and manually post what their credit should be before 2010. And when we do that, and once we do that once for each member, that will always be visible to the member going forward. So sometimes you might get a cred service request from our benefits department, basically saying, we need you to verify what the person was working, whether or not they're full-time. Occasionally, we'll send these even for post-2010 service, just to make sure we have the right information on file. Even though the reporting is strict and we try to make sure we're getting the best information we can, it's not always perfect, so we want to make sure we're verifying it. So you'll see that we'll ask for clarification on gaps of service and leaves, confirmation of FTE for given periods. And what you'll see is this is easier and easier as the more service they have is in MTRS, because the MTRS reporting process really tries to move a lot of this up front, while it's new facts or current facts, and hopefully a lot easier for employers to complete. Now, the next thing that you might be asked to do are service purchase applications. There are three kinds of service applications. There are probably 8, I think, in total, but there are 3 that very specifically involve the employer. The most common one is public school substitute, temporary part-time service, teaching or tutoring. So this generally catches when people, maybe they were too part-time to belong to the retirement system, they're a day-by-day sub, that sort of thing. And now, once they become an MTRS member, they may be eligible to purchase that time. That's the most common one that we have to ask employers to fill out. There's also a vocational education work experience. So for those of you who employ vocational teachers, there is a bill that allows them to purchase, I believe it's up to 2 years of service, basically for working not in the public sector, under the bill or the part of the law that allows it. Essentially, if they're teaching plumbing, they were probably a plumber first, so it lets them get, buy a little bit of credit for that. It is a very expensive purchase, but that would be, we need information on when they were first hired and exactly what their initial information was to make that happen. And then last but not least is military service. So in addition to active military service, somebody who becomes an MTRS member may be eligible to purchase previous military service. And so part of that calculation process includes the assessment of what their original salary was with the MTRS as a member. So we'll be looking for that information from employers on that application. And again, for service purchases, we talked a little bit about some of the information we're going to collect. So we're looking for their job titles, if they were paid hourly, weekly, what they got paid. One thing I can't say enough is we're trying to encourage our members as much as possible, if they think they might have eligible time to purchase it as soon, or at least document it as soon in their career as possible. The longer this goes, the scarier those records get. We hear about things like floods and tornadoes and all kinds of other things that have wiped out old records. And some of those purchases are not possible if we can't certify them. So, we try to tell members to apply as soon as possible, but every year we have at least a few that wait until they're retiring to try and purchase it. So hopefully you won't get too many that are really old. Now, the probably most important application we have as a retirement system is our retirement application. It's the one that all of us hopefully are hoping to fill out one day. So with retirement application, there's a couple of different types of benefits. The retirement application can be a little bit much. There is a lot of information you have to provide in that, and I do understand that. We have an entire video. One of our managers, Kristen, did an amazing job, and it's a video. It's up on the employer site that will walk you through every single piece of the retirement application. I think it takes like a half hour, and she goes through like all the scenarios she can think of. So it's a fantastic video if you're filling out retirement applications for the first time. I can't say enough. Don't even call me with the questions. Watch the video first. She is much better at it than I'll ever be, and she does a great job in that video. We talk about, which employers have to fill out Part 2, right? Because you might have somebody who changes employers a couple times. Do they need a Part 2 from every single employer they've ever worked at? And the answer to that is no. They need a Part 2 of an application. A lot of times people have worked at the last employer for, the full 5 years before retirement or whatever, and they only need one Part 2. Occasionally, you'll have someone who changes employer shortly before they retired. Maybe they need 2 of them. Or if they're in a situation where they were getting paid better at an older employer than they are at their current employer. Maybe they, a superintendent, and they're like, look, I just don't want to be a superintendent anymore. I'm going to take a job as a principal somewhere else. That might be a situation where somebody needs more than one Part 2. So you might get one and say, they're not my employee anymore. They left 2 years ago. Well, if your employment is either at their highest salary point or within their last 5 years, it is possible we might need Part 2 for at least part of the information to figure out their retirement benefit. We do have some tips that we talk about a little bit here for completing Part 2. You only want to use eligible earnings in the earnings fields. You'll see that there's a section for non-eligible earnings that is over to the right. It's very similar to the way the deduction report works. One thing that I think can throw people off every once in a while is in the retirement application, we use the word salary a little bit differently. Occasionally, we actually mean base pay. But aside from that, I think it generally is fairly straightforward when you're paying stuff. And one thing I can't say enough is everybody has this crazy scenario every once in a while. And if you do, please reach out to us. And the folks in employer services might not be able to help you with it, but we will get you somebody in the benefits team who knows the answer to the question. And so always feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be the conduit to get you to that person. And then just some other important things to remember about the retirement application. Now, some of this is probably pretty straightforward because it's literally a checklist on the application, right? But if they're covered by a collective bargaining agreement, make sure that you're including pieces of the collective bargaining agreement as specified on the contract so that the person evaluating their retirement application has the information they need to pay them. If they're covered by an individual contract, make sure you're covering you include the contracts that cover their last 5 years of employment. Make sure that your reporting service history includes things like leave of absences, if they're on workers' compensation. That would all be very important. And the specification to some of that stuff, if you attend our creditable service training session we're going to do in a few weeks, we'll really get deep into that, into how members earn service and why certain things are important to be distinct. If the member's part-time, please remember to always report their full year salary, just like in deduction reports. And if the person was on workers' comp for some of the process or some of their time while they were working, it's important that we get workers' compensation documentation. So for instance, you could have a situation where a person goes on workers' comp, they have no pay for an entire year other than their workers' comp payments. So they're completely off of their deduction reports. And from our side, especially if it was before MTRS, before you could put in an event in for them that recorded and alerted us, that person would just look like they fell off the system for a year. However, while they were on workers' compensation, if they were on full disability on workers' compensation, they actually get service for that. So I had a case where somebody, they reached out to us and they were like, look, I'm going to retire. And I had this year back in 2002 and I had this horrible accident and I was out of work for a whole year. And it just doesn't seem fair. I'm not going to get any credit for that. And I was like, no, you're absolutely right. That's why the law gives you credit for it. We just didn't know about it. So we got the information. I think the employer had to go through the Department of Industrial Accidents to get a copy of the report. But the member got full credit for that year because they're entitled to it. So it's very important that we know that distinction over other leave of absences. And then mid-year retirements. Mid-year retirements are just a little more complicated in the sense that they're calculated on a weighted basis. So if you have somebody who's retiring this year, they're going to go out in the middle of the year. I'm not going to get date specific. I know the slide has some dates in here, but what it's really going to come down to is, are they going to get their pay for like 60% of the year? Okay, so if they're going to get 60% of a school year's pay, we're going to take 0.6 years of that salary average. We're going to take the years before that in whole, and then we're going to take 0.4 years of the year before the full years to bring them out to a full number of years. So if it's 3 years or 5 years, we're going to sort of couple together the portion of the last year with the offsetting portion of the year, whether it's 3 or 5 years ago, and then full years in between, so that they get a full 3 years of service or a full 5 years of salary average, all incorporated. And of course, their service is based on tenths of a year, and we'll get more specific into that into the cred service portion of the program that we're going to do in a couple weeks. But it's super important when you're completing these that you're doing the math. That's why we ask them very, I'm sure it seems a little strange as far as some of the questions we ask. But it's also important that if something's getting prorated, like say a stipend, or we're trying to match that up to the contract. So please list the full amount, even if they're not getting paid the full amount, then you can just note the fact that they only get 2/3 of it, or, that sort of thing. So you can see in this example that the person on the retirement application has a yearbook club stipend. It's normally paid $1,500, but they're only going to get $500 because they're only working, apparently 1/3 of the year. And so that's how you want to provide that information. And if it gets really crazy calculation wise, you can always reach out to us. And in some cases, it'll be about noting it on the retirement application that you're going to attach additional documentation to better explain the situation. However, I will say, if you go to our regular compensation class, hopefully you'll have an idea, because if it gets that crazy, it may not be retirement eligible. So it's important that we figure that out too. All right. And last but not least, can't say this enough, member has a portion of the retirement application, including a checklist of all the things they need to do. There's a portion they can give to you, okay? And you complete that part. You give it to the member. You do not send it to us. You give it to the member. It's the member's responsibility to gather everything together and send us a full package, okay? The employer section or the employer portion of the retirement application, just that portion, can be downloaded from our employer site. That way, if somebody calls you up and they send it to you and they gave you their part 2 and you accidentally spill coffee on it, or they call you and they're like, hey, can you do a retirement application? You can say, no problem. I'll download part B for you, or part 2 for you, and I'll complete it and send it to you. Okay, so that's an option. What's nice about that option too is it's interactive, so you can type into it instead of writing. I'm left-handed. My parents thought I was going to be a doctor, based solely on my handwriting. So obviously that didn't work out. But it's much cleaner and neater to be able to fill them out interactively. So download those locally. You can't do it while it's on the website. You got to download it locally, but then you can sit there and type in everything. And it just allows you to delete, make changes, whatever you got to do. And you can keep a copy so that if you mail them a copy and they lose it, not that a teacher would ever lose paperwork, but if they were to lose it, you would have a copy and you can always resend them another copy and not have to do everything all over again. So big incentive to doing the interactive form. All right. So a couple last things. We only have maybe 2 things in, so I'm still on schedule here. Retiree insurance. So retiree insurance, we have an entire section of training materials that are available to this, so it'll be far more specific in this. But from a high level, retirees insurance is something offered by employers, and you provide insurance to your retirees if you've elected to. Once you do, it's no longer elective. And that's in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 32B. Okay, so this isn't an MTRS rule, it's an actual law in Massachusetts. So the MTRS is permitted to withhold retiree insurance deductions for teacher pension payments at the request of the employer, and that's done in accordance with Chapter 32, Section 19. So we're allowed to take those contributions, and it is very limited in what we're allowed to take. So we can't do, let's say they owed you money from when they were an active employee and there was a mistake during the retirement process, that sort of stuff. We can't take any kind of makeup contributions when it comes to active employment. We can't just randomly take things from them. It can only be for the purpose of administering their insurance as a retiree, because that's what the law says. So that's always just going to be an important thing. If you're one of the school districts that pays the GIC, the Group Insurance Commission, to manage the process for you, then you don't do anything in MTRS. They take care of everything. There are a lot of people who use GIC benefits who administer it themselves, and those folks would use MTRS. And we have, again, full set of training, a bunch of videos. I'm sorry you're going to be listening to me for those processes, but we have 6 new videos we just recorded, as well as a session like this that we had available when we rolled it out. And we have a written manual that we just went through cover to cover to hopefully improve it based on the previous version. So hopefully there's ample materials out there, and certainly if you have questions on those, please let us know. And then last but not least, even though employers manage the individual changes, employers manage the plans themselves as far as their costs. If you need a new plan added, that is the one thing that MTRS still has to do for you. And then, of course, we're always here for support or if you have questions. So that's how retiree insurance works. And now our last overall topic, which is GASB reporting. So again, this will be brief. The MTRS, or the Commonwealth actually, publishes a GASB statement number 68 every year, and it's available to you from the employer website. So this is a statement that those of you involved with this, because we provide you a free benefit, the government wants to know exactly how much of a benefit we're providing for you. They kind of use that to help figure out who's paying for what benefits. So in other states where the schools are paying for the benefit themselves, they probably get a little more credit than when the Commonwealth's paying it on your behalf. I don't know the full extent of that, but I can tell you that the number 68 will be published every year, and it is available to you on our website as soon as it is made available to us to share. For employers that are looking to do an OPEB study or some sort of actuarial analysis for their retirees, we have a report. It's called a GASB 45. There used to be a GASB statement number 45. It's no longer used, but we still use the format that provides you information for all of your retirees. A lot of folks like to use this as their also use this as a roster for notifying retirees when they have open enrollment, that sort of thing, because all the information's there. It includes your retirees' contact information. One thing to be cautious of right now is that if you are offering benefits to somebody who didn't technically retire from your employer, that person may not be on the report. I'm working to fix that. It's something we've become aware of relatively recently. But all of your other retirees and survivors will be listed there. So, and it's good to maintain your own roster, but if nothing else, you can use our contact information. Much like we do in reverse for active employees, we're the party that they're going to be most motivated to tell if they move or something. So you can download addresses. We have email addresses for more retirees than by percentage than we do for active members, which is crazy but true. So there are ways that you can reach out to your retirees that you can pull from that GASB 45 report, which is available right in MTRS. And then last but not least, my MTRS does not offer any sort of OPEB information for active employees. They're your employees currently, so you have to you take care of that portion. So even though we will help you with the retirees who we are paying, we don't provide any sort of data for OPEB studies for your active employees and how much service they have. That's not something we offer. And then I just wanted to sort of end by just highlighting, again, you're an important part of what we do. We're looking to work collaboratively with you. We all succeed together as we provide these benefits to your employees. So please know that you're a major part of what we do. And then last but not least, you might find yourself in a situation like the young lady in this slide where you're just like, you know what, I just need some help. So if you go to our external website, under employers, and the second tab is contact employer services. So if you're not sure who your employer services rep is, you can always email into the group box, which is EMPSUP, which is short for employer support. We don't even make you type out the whole word. It's empsup@trb.state.ma.us. It also has our main mailing address, but certainly reach out to the employer services team if there's anything we can help you with. If you know who your assigned rep is, please contact them for anything you need that's MTRS related. And again, there might be occasions where we connect you with a better resource, but you can always use your assigned employer services representative as your point of contact. And with that, I made it in 1 hour. So are there any questions coming in?
Yeah. We do have a few. Christine's working on some in the chat. I pulled a few here.
Okay.
So let's jump right in.
Yeah, let's do it.
When our employees use the estimator, they're finding small reductions in the FTE for creditable service. When we verify the information in MTRS in our systems, we don't see anything that would indicate why a reduction is being seen. How does the FTE difference happen and how does it get corrected?
Okay, great question. So one of the things that everybody always looks past on the cred service estimator that's available for members is that there's a big thick paragraph. And in that thick paragraph, what we mention to them, as everybody knows here, the concept I think we generally call calendar creep, which is sometimes pay dates sort of slide a little bit in or out of a school year. And so on the estimator, which is clearly just an estimator, occasionally you'll have somebody who's down a little bit of service because of rounding. They might be down a little service because of the way that their service was credited when they got a mid-year raise. Or it could just simply be calendar creep, which is one of their payments for a particular school year is displaying in a different school year. And so MTRS is truncating it to only show 1 year in the year that has too much service, but they might be short a payment in another year's service. It also sometimes, though, it's hard to say in a blanket statement. Occasionally, it's actually a sign that something went wrong in reporting. They had a leave of absence and they forgot, or it hasn't been documented to us. I had an interesting conversation with a woman who had a couple of gaps in service, and I just happened to notice that they all lined up with the birth of her children. And so she just didn't realize that, oh yeah, well, while I was on unpaid leave, I wasn't earning service credit. So there can be a variety of different reasons for it. But if you have somebody who was working full-time, they got paid full-time, it either could be a rounding thing, which is possible, particularly if we didn't catch that there was a base to salary situation going on. If we overlooked that the wrong service correction code was used, we'll get into that in deduction reporting and why that's so important, both that and in creditable service. So some of those things can contribute. The most common one that we've been getting recently is that folks aren't paying attention to the fact that their employer is simply just behind on reports, or we're behind on getting all the information needed to release the reports. One of the dates on the creditable service estimate says this is good through this date. And sometimes folks aren't paying attention to that. So if we have 3 reports to release, that, this year is not going to be complete until we get all those reports released into the members' accounts. But hopefully that answers that.
Charter schools do not have contracts. How does that change what is needed on a retirement application?
It's a great question. So a lot of times you have appointment letters, or generally have some sort of paperwork that generates their salaries. So that would suffice. So there's no legal requirement. Technically, if a lawyer were here, they'd tell you that you do have an employment contract. It's an understood. Here at the MTRS, for instance, we don't have written contracts, but there's an understood relationship that they call the employment contract, where you're hiring them and you're going to pay them a certain salary, and in turn, they're going to show up and work hard, hopefully, and do a great job, right? And so that still counts as a contract. For documentation purposes, I presume you must have something that says, hey, keep showing up and I'm going to give you this much money. And so we'd be looking for that information. It may not be as elaborate as a collective bargaining agreement or an individual administrator contract, but we'd be looking for that. And of course, make sure it includes all the pay. And if you go to the regular compensation session, we'll get into that.
I think this is an important question. Do the retirement applications require a wet signature, or is a copy okay?
As of now, we are requiring, a wet signature. In cases where maybe a copy of one was lost or something, it is possible that we'll accept a letter with a copy. But to my knowledge, is at this point, we are requiring wet signatures on all retirement applications.
Why does the application ask about preschool and kindergarten employment?
Kindergarten employment, so this has changed, but there was a time where kindergarten teachers, their full-time scale was actually less than all of the other teachers working in the same school district. So if a elementary school teacher was working 35 hours a week, kindergarten teachers were often working every single year only, say, 28 hours a week. And so if they were a kindergarten teacher and they were getting paid less, it was about really indicating why that looks like their pay is lower and that treating it as a full year of service. There are some very specific dates around when and how that changed that are available on our website, but that's why we're looking for that information.
Great. Just a couple more.
Sure. I apparently stopped asking about this. Sorry.
No, I got heated up near the end. Can you talk about if an MTRS member needs to be vested and how it would affect refunds, creditable service, and retirement?
Okay. So as far as being vested in our system would be at least 10 years of service, meaning they qualify for retirement benefit for the first time. So really, it's whether or not they qualify for retirement is what it translates to at the MTRS. As far as taking a refund, if they have 10 or more years of service, they don't get that scale up of interest that I mentioned. It is very well explained out in the refund application process that if they have 10 or less years, we're going to, basically the legislature gives them more interest because they never actually earned a benefit. But as far as having to be vested, I mean, there's no rule or some sort of penalty against them if they have less than 10 years of service or while they're accruing it. But they would be considered vested if they get to the point where they have at least 10 years of creditable service.
Right. One final question. It's a scenario. A person leaves a public school system and does not cash or transfer their funds. The employee works for a healthcare system and comes back to the public school job within the same school year. Can they pay for the months that they have missed, or do they lose out on the months that they were out? Okay.
So we'll get into this a lot more in the credible service, much more in depth, but the quick answer is they weren't serving the public, so they can't get credit for that time. So if they leave, they go to any private sector job, and then they return to the public retirement system, they're certainly welcome back, and they'll start accruing service the moment they come back and start serving in the public. If they were to leave public teaching and they went to another public job of some sort, they go to work at DESE, right? Or they go work at the town library, or they go to work for a retirement board. All of that would be different. It would transfer to the other board and then would transfer back, and they would get service for all that time. But if they've left the public, they will not be earning public service in the public service retirement system. If that makes sense. Cool. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. All right. I at least kept the presentation part to the hour. So thank you all, and thank you all for your questions, all kidding aside. Again, we're going to do Overall, it's really 6 programs, but we're offering 7 because we're doing a variation for charter schools on the eligibility. So hopefully folks go to one or the other of those programs. The only real difference there is that we're going to target one of them more towards charter schools. So thanks again for joining us. And with that, have a great Wednesday.